Malelele Bulavinaka Fafetai Lava, and welcome to another episode of Pacific Empowerment with Akanesikau Fusi. Why is it that when we women speak up, we are labeled as disobedient or bad? For decades, men have used the Bible to control and manipulate women. There are countless examples where scripture was twisted to justify inequality. For centuries, women have been treated unfairly in workplaces, at home, and in society as a whole. And let me be clear, I'm not a feminist, and I don't like victim mindset. But when you start standing up for yourself, you realize how quickly the world can label you bad. Just because you don't stay quiet or stay home and only serve your husband. Even in the testimonies of the tou'a, you hear the same pattern. Women who stand up against mockery or sexual harassment are called bad women simply for protecting their dignity. That's why in this episode, we are going to talk about women who made history. Women who weren't afraid to stand up for what they believed in. And remember the title of this episode: Well-behaved women rarely make history. That doesn't mean these women were bad. It just means they were fierce, determined, and unafraid to defy the odds for something bigger than themselves. For example, Maya Angelou. For those of you who are not familiar with Maya Angelou, her life started with heartbreak. She was born in 1928 in St. Louis. Her parents' marriage fell apart when she was just 3. She was sent alone on a train with her brother to live with her grandmother in Arkansas. At 7, Maya suffered sexual abuse. She told her family, and the man was jailed, but released soon after. Not long after that, he was killed, likely by members of her family. That moment shook young Maya so deeply that she stopped speaking for nearly 5 years. But silence didn't destroy her. In that silence, she developed an extraordinary memory, an ear for music and poetry, and a deep love for literature. She eventually found her voice again and went on to sing, dance, act, and write. Maya became one of the most powerful storytellers in history. Her book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, broke barriers. It was one of the first widely read books to talk openly about race, identity, abuses, and resilience from a Black woman's perspective. She worked alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X in the civil rights movement. Later, she became a mentor to Oprah and a voice of wisdom to millions. Her words still echo today. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Another strong woman we can learn from is Harriet Tubman. If you haven't heard of Harriet Tubman, there's a movie about her. Harriet Tubman was known as the conductor of freedom. She was born around 1820 into slavery in Maryland. And from the time she was a child, she was forced to work long, back-breaking hours. She was beaten so badly once that it caused her lifelong seizures and headaches. But Harriet wasn't broken. She was determined. In her 20s, she made the daring escape north to freedom. But here's what makes Harriet extraordinary. She didn't stop once she was free. She kept going back, time after time, leading enslaved people to freedom. Through the Underground Railroad, she carried a pistol not to fight the enemy, but to give courage to those who grew afraid and wanted to turn back. You'll be free or you'll die, she told them. They called her Moses, like the biblical leader who led his people out of Egypt. Over her lifetime, she personally guided around 70 enslaved people to freedom and gave instructions that freed hundreds more. Later, she even worked as a spy for the Union Army during the Civil War, and Harriet's courage helped dismantle slavery one journey at a time. Rosa Parks, I have mentioned her before, but we can mention her again because she changed the course of history. Rosa Parks was born in 1913 in Alabama in a world where segregation was law. Black children went to separate schools, Black families couldn't vote without impossible tests, and Black riders were forced to give up seats on buses for white passengers. Rosa worked as a seamstress, but she also served as secretary for the NAACP, already quietly involved in civil rights. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa was riding a bus home when the driver ordered her to give up her seats for a white man. But Rosa said no. She wasn't the first to resist, but she was the one who sparked a movement. Her arrest led to the Montgomery bus boycott, a massive protest that lasted over a year. Black citizens walked miles to work, organized carpools, and endured harassment, but they stood firm. Eventually, the Supreme Court ruled segregation on buses unconstitutional. Rosa didn't shout. She didn't fight. She simply sat, and by doing so, she stood up for millions. What about Malala Yousafzai, the girl who wouldn't be silenced? Malala was born in Pakistan in 1997 in a region where the Taliban was gaining power. Her father was a teacher who ran a school and believed girls had the right to learn. Malala grew up loving books and education, but the Taliban banned girls from going to school. Instead of staying silent, Malala began speaking publicly, even writing blogs for the BBC as a young teenager. Her voice became too loud for the Taliban to ignore, and one day in 2012, as she was riding the bus home from school, a gunman boarded and shot her in the head. Malala was just 15 years old, but she survived. And instead of silencing her, that bullet made her louder. Malala went on to speak at the United Nations. She started the Malala Fund to support girls' education worldwide. And at 17, she became the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. She is living proof that courage can be stronger than violence. And that is why I encourage more of our Pacific women to start educating yourself, start reading books, start taking courses, so you can be able to support yourself financially, so you can be able to survive anywhere you go. I remember when I was still young in Tonga and my brother was living in New Zealand, and sometimes I would request stuff for my brother to send me, and they didn't send it to me. And sometimes I would get disappointed and I would cry to my parents. And my mom and dad always told me to educate myself and study hard and focus on my studies so that one day I can be able to buy anything that I want, without having to rely on someone, without having to beg someone, without having to ask someone, to buy me stuff. And as you can see now, I am able to, stand up for these women, to be a voice for those who are voiceless. And all because my parents were encouraging me to focus on my studies and educate myself. And it doesn't matter if you don't have university or not. If you didn't go to university, you can still take a course online. It's never too late. It doesn't matter what's your age. It is never too late, to take a course or something. But that is something that I'm thankful to my parents for, is for encouraging me to educate myself. And for the women who tou'a, that's why, I'm encouraging our women, our Tongan women, to focus on working hard on yourself or educating yourself so you can be able to earn money without having to tou'a. So you don't have to rely on entertaining men to earn money. You are worth more than that. You are a child of God. You don't deserve to be treated and sexually harassed in faikava in order to get money. And you can achieve anything. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot achieve anything or you cannot do anything. That is a limited mindset. That is why so many people have sent me messages and comments that say, oh, you can't do nothing. Oh, you can't stop it. You can't do this. That is a limited mindset. And anyone who comes with a limited mindset and try to project it onto me, I just block them. Because I do not let anyone come and tell me what I can or cannot do. I can achieve anything I can put my mind to. With God's help, anything is possible. And I hope to encourage more of our women to please start educating yourself, start learning or start finding a job, find a good, decent job and work hard. You don't have to rely on tou'a to earn money. And that is my encouragement to our women. I'm sure everyone has heard of Oprah Winfrey. From poverty to power, she is a great example, So Oprah Winfrey was born in 1954 in Mississippi. She grew up in poverty. Her childhood was filled with trauma, abuse, neglect, instability. She often voiced the abuse that she went through in her TV show and her books. By all odds, the world expected Oprah to fail, but she had something powerful, her voice. Oprah started as a teenage radio host, then moved into TV, and she wasn't the typical polished anger, and people criticized her for being too emotional. But that empathy, that realness, became her greatest strength. When the Oprah Winfrey Show launched, it broke every rule. She talked about issues no one else would, like race, trauma, healing, spirituality, forgiveness. She connected with millions, and she became the first black woman billionaire and built a media empire. But more than money, Oprah gave people a mirror to see themselves, to heal, to dream. She used her platform not just for herself, but to lift others higher. And that is what I hope with my platform, Pacific Empowerment, is to help empower our Pacific Island people to have a better life, a better family, a better relationship. And we can also learn from Jacinda Ardern. For those of you who know Jacinda Ardern, she was the youngest woman prime minister in New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern was born in 1980 in a small town in New Zealand. She didn't come from wealth or political dynasties. She studied politics, worked for the Labour Party, and by 37, she became the youngest female head of government in the world. But what made Jacinda unique wasn't just her age, it was her style of leadership. In 2019, when a terrorist attack targeted two mosques in Christchurch, Jacinda responded with compassion. She wore a hijab when she visited grieving families. She held them, she cried with them. She called the nation to unity and not division. Within weeks, her government passed strict gun reforms. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Jacinda's transparent, empathetic communication was praised globally. She showed that leaders don't have to be cold or distant to be effective. She proved that kindness and strength can go hand in hand. Even when she stepped down in 2023, she left behind a model of leadership rooted in humanity. Now, let's look at women from the Bible, strong women from the Bible that we can draw an example from. Let's start with Deborah from the Bible. In a time when Israel was oppressed and men were supposed to lead, God raised a woman. Deborah was a prophetess and the only female judge of Israel. People came to her for wisdom, for justice, for guidance. But Deborah wasn't just sitting under a palm tree giving advice, no. She was also a leader in battle. When Israel's army was too afraid to fight against their enemy, Deborah stood up. She told Barak, the commander, that God would deliver the enemy into their hands. Barak said he wouldn't go without her. So Deborah went with him into battle. And guess what? They won. Her story reminds us that leadership isn't about gender. It's about courage and faith. God can choose anyone, whether man or woman, to do his work. What about Esther, the famous Esther, the queen who risked her life for her people? Esther was a young Jewish woman living in Persia who became queen. But when a law was passed to kill all the Jews, her people, Esther had a choice. Stay silent and save herself, or speak up and risk her life. She chose courage. She went before the king, even though it was illegal and could mean death. She revealed her identity as a Jew and begged for her people's lives. Because of her bravery, the Jewish people were saved. Esther's story shows us that sometimes God places us exactly where we are, whether in a palace, a workplace, or a family, for a bigger purpose. For such a time as this, her cousin Mordecai told her, and she lived it. And I think the story of Esther, I think we can all relate to her now, with all the issues, the tradition, how people think that our tradition cannot be changed. Anything can change. Nothing can be permanent. If we keep raising awareness, if we keep pushing, and just like Esther, taking the risk, just like me, I'm like fighting everyone online, because I don't care if they are coming after me, as long as I'm able to protect these women and the young generations from these abuse. That is a risk and sacrifice I'm willing to make. As you can see last week, so many people try to bring up my past. Even though many of them are lies, they try to bring up my past. They try to bring up everything I did. And that's what the demons and the enemy is doing, is trying to stop me from doing this work, from fighting this issue. And people are coming at me. I'm lucky. I do not have to risk my life like Esther to be killed, but she was so strong. She was willing to lose her life for her people. And I'm hoping more of our women will be strong and courageous like Esther, to stand up and speak up for what is right. Because that is the only way for change to happen. Because in Tonga, I remember studying in Queen Salote College, where I went to secondary school. You are told to be obedient, to be a really good, humble girl, a woman, I mean, it's good. You can be obedient to your husband. You can be obedient to your parents. You can be humble. But there is always a time for everything. You can't stay quiet when you see something wrong. You have to speak up. That doesn't mean you are a bad person. It just means you're a strong person to speak up for what is right. Because the Bible teaches us to speak up for what is right, And I think that's why I don't really care about what other people say about me. It's because I am not doing this for me. I'm doing this for the young women. And for the women, though, who have been sexually assaulted in faikava, that we don't know. There's so many out there, but we never heard about their stories, even though we grew up hearing the abuse and the sexual harassment in the faikava. But we cannot let that continue, There comes a time when we need to stop these abuse and these sexual assaults, for the nations to become a better nation, for the women and for the people to become better people. And on that note, we can learn from courageous women in the Pacific that leads and made history in the Pacific. For example, our very own Queen, Tongan Queen Salote Tupou III. She was a beloved monarch. Queen Salote was born in 1900, and at just 18 years old, she became the first queen regnant of Tonga. Imagine being a teenage girl suddenly leading an entire kingdom, and she ruled for nearly 50 years through wars, colonization pressures, and global change. You know what made Queen Salote unique and unforgettable? Wasn't just her leadership, but her heart. She loved her people deeply. At the Queen's coronation in London in 1953, she refused to close her carriage roof in the pouring rain, smiling and waving to the crowd the entire way. That small act captured the world's attention. People saw her humility and dignity. Under her reign, Tonga remained independent, while many other Pacific nations were being colonized or controlled. She showed that leadership could be strong, humble, and deeply connected to culture. We can also learn from Dame Whina Cooper, the mother of the Maori activism. Whina Cooper was born in 1895 in New Zealand. She grew up seeing Maori land taken and Maori people pushed aside. But Whina wasn't going to stay silent. She became the first president of the Maori Women's Welfare League in 1951, focusing on the health, education, and the rights of her people. But her biggest moment came in 1975, when she was 79 years old. She led the famous Maori Land March. Thousands of people walked 1,000 kilometers from the far north of New Zealand all the way to Parliament in Wellington, demanding protection of Maori land rights. Whina, tiny in size but fierce in spirit, walked at the front holding a child's hand, symbolizing the future. She became a national icon and is remembered as Te Whaia o Te Motu, the mother of the nation. We can also learn from Hilda Heine, the first female president of the Marshall Islands. Hilda Heine made history in 2016 when she became the first woman to ever serve as president of the Marshall Islands. And not just that, the first female head of state in all of Micronesia. Born in 1951, she grew up on an island where education for girls wasn't a priority. But she pushed through, becoming the first Marshallese person, male or female, to earn a doctorate. She spent her career fighting for education and later stepped into politics. As president, she was a powerful voice for climate change awareness, telling the world that rising seas weren't just statistics, they were life and death for her people. She showed that Pacific women could sit at the highest tables of power and speak for their nations. So, reflecting on myself, looking at these brave women, I've always had a strong personality. I've always been the one to stand up for what I believed in and speak up, even when it wasn't easy or when it made other people uncomfortable. Ever since I was a child, when I was little, there's been this fire in me. And for the longest time, I used to wonder, why am I like this? Why am I so strong willed? As I've grown older, I've come to realize it wasn't by accident. God gave me this strength, this stubborn determination for a reason. He didn't make me strong so I could fight just for myself. He made me strong so I could see injustice and not turn away and not turn a blind eye. He made me strong so I could use my voice to speak for those who are voiceless, to defend those who cannot fight for themselves. It hasn't always been easy. Being strong sometimes means being misunderstood, being labeled as too much, too confident, or being called names by those who don't understand. But I've learned that courage isn't about being liked. It's about standing for what is right, no matter the cost. And if my strength can help even one person feel seen, protected, or empowered, then I know I'm living the purpose God created me for. When I look at these stories, from the women of the Bible to world changers like Rosa Parks, Maya Angelou, Malala, to our very own Pacific leaders like Queen Salote and Dame Whina Cooper, I see one thing running through them all: courage. Not the kind of courage that waits for the perfect moment, no, but the kind that rises up even when the world says, sit down, stay quiet, know your place. These women carried nations. They broke chains, defied kings, healed communities, and spoke truths that others were too afraid to say. They were labeled rebels, disobedient, even bad women, but history remembers them as the one who lit the fire. And here's the thing: we are their daughters. Their prayers, their battles, their wisdom, their strength runs through our veins. Their courage is not just history, it's inheritance. So, the question I'll leave you today with is this: when the next generation looks back, what kind of women will they say we were? Did we stay quiet or did we stand? Because well behaved women rarely make history. And maybe, just maybe, we were never born to be well behaved. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something from this episode, and I will talk to you next week, same time, same place. Minakabakalevu, fafetai lava, malo albito, and have a great day and a great week.